Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This government recognises the importance of the UK's world-leading cultural and creative industries. We recently demonstrated this commitment by providing an unprecedented £1.57 billion package of support to help them through the COVID-19 pandemic. It's entirely consistent, therefore, that we pushed for ambitious arrangements for performers and artists to be able to work across Europe during the negotiations with the EU. Our proposals, which were informed by our extensive consultation and engagement with UK's cultural and creative industries, would have allowed UK musicians and other cultural touring professionals to travel and perform in the UK and the EU more easily without the need for work permits. But regrettably, these very mutually beneficial proposals were rejected by the EU. As a result, UK cultural professionals seeking to tour within the EU will be required to check domestic immigration and visitor rules for each member state in which they intend to tour. Although some member states allow touring without a permit, others will require a pre-approved visa and/or a work permit. It's absolutely vital that we now support our touring sectors to understand the new rules associated with working and travelling in the EU, and we're delivering an extensive programme of engagement with the sector to help them understand any new requirements. This includes working with the Arts Council England and various other sector bodies to help distill and clarify the new rules. As my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has already made very clear, we will also look at whether we can work with our partners in EU member states to find ways to make life easier for those working in the creative industries in our respective countries. And in the meantime, we will continue close dialogue with the creative and cultural sectors to understand the ongoing impacts and ensure that they have the right support at the right time to continue to thrive.
I will call Pete Wishart, who is participating virtually, who's 2 minutes. Pete Wishart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is an immensely disappointing response from the Minister. Touring Europe means everything to our artists and musicians. The thrill of that first tour, crammed into the transit van with all your gear, 4 to a room in a cheap hotel in Paris, Rotterdam or Hamburg, using what's left of the fee for a post-gig beer. The dream that when you come back, it will be in a lavish tour bus staying in 5-star hotels. Gone. All gone. Musicians and artists mere collateral in this government's obsession in ending freedom of movement. Does the Minister acknowledge that visas and carnets will render these type of tours beyond financial reach to future generations of new musicians? Does she appreciate that it's not just the new musicians, it's the whole creative sector which will have increased costs and red tape? What does she say to the crews, the technicians, the set designers, the transport? We were promised by her predecessor that arrangements would not change. What has happened to that commitment? The EU said they were prepared to offer a 90-day deal. Why was that turned down? The government said they were holding out for a better deal, but we've ended up with nothing. How could that happen? Given the Minister's approach is totally contradicted by the EU, will the Minister provide complete transparency in all these negotiations? Mr. Speaker, our constituents really care about this. 263,000 have now signed a petition organised by our artists calling for this to get sorted. We don't want any more of the EU blaming. We've had quite enough of that in the past few years. We just want the government to fix this. The Secretary of State has said the door is still open. So will she walk through this and fix it out? Will she now restart talks with the EU immediately to get our artists the arrangements they need? Will she let the music tour freely once again?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Honourable Gentleman is right to point out that this is incredibly disappointing news for the music sector. It is not the deal that we wanted, but I'm afraid that in many other senses he has fallen for some very selective briefing. The EU did not offer a deal that would have worked for musicians. It's quite simple. The EU, in fact, made a very broad offer which would not have been compatible with the government's manifesto commitment to take back control of our borders. And I would remind him that the British people, the British public, voted for that at successive elections. To the extent that the EU proposals may have covered music, they also wouldn't have worked for touring artists at all. Their proposals covered ad hoc performances. They also wouldn't have covered support staff or technicians at all, which, as he will remember from his touring days, are completely essential. I mean, I'd love him to explain to me how tours will happen without support staff or technicians, because I'm not a music professional, but I can't see how that could be the case. The UK's proposals were actually based upon what the music industry said they wanted. We spoke to them long and hard about this. I'm fascinated to think that he knows better than bodies like the Musicians' Union. We fought very hard for what they wanted. The EU wouldn't play ball. But let's focus on the future. If the EU is willing to consider the UK's very sensible proposals, then the door is open. And yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to walk through it. I'll be the first one through that door. A mutually beneficial deal isn't what the SNP want, though, is it? I mean, they voted for a no-deal Brexit, so under their plans, it would have been even harder. And as the music industry themselves have said, what they need now is clarity, not recriminations. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what the British government are working to provide.
Let's head up to Solihull with the Chair of the Select Committee, Julian Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This issue is not just about musicians being able to travel and perform with ease. They also need somewhere to strut their stuff. Will the Minister commit to an overarching strategy to get live music thriving again, involving a restart of urgent negotiations for a pan-EU musicians visa, bearing in mind previous EU intransigence and listening to the music industry? But also, will the government commit to back COVID insurance for our festivals and live music sector to allow them to plan for the summer and beyond?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman's absolutely right. There's quite a lot we can do here. The sector, they need clarity and they need certainty about what the situation is. And because the situation with every member state is different, that's going to be tricky to provide. So what we need to do is make it as simple, as easy and as clear for them to tour and go about their business as we possibly can. And that is what we're setting about to do right now. He raises the issue of insurance. It's an excellent point. We understand that that is a barrier to very many live music events being able to take place later on in the year, and we're in discussions with our colleagues in the Treasury about that at the moment.
I'm going to call the Shadow Minister, Alison McGovern, who's participating virtually, who has 2 minutes. Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to draw the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. As we've heard, Mr. Speaker, the government still blame the EU. So in order to get this issue straight, can the Minister make clear what exactly the UK proposed and when they proposed it, and if the UK offer was more than their standard visa policy? Second, on this, she said that the EU offer was a broad offer not consistent with taking back control of our borders. So will she go further and explain specifically when that offer was turned down? And finally, so that we all can be clear, will she place in the Library of the House of Commons all correspondence between the UK and the EU on this, and between UK government departments on this issue? But what does matter is what happens now, Mr. Speaker. And a third of the creative industry is self-employed. And this situation is a massive kick in the teeth for a group of workers already having the worst year in living memory. So what representations has the UK made to resolve this? And can she say what meetings are scheduled? Is the UK still going to rely on Mode 4 exemptions, even though doing so is without precedent? And can I ask her if she agrees that the resolution to this situation requires a supplementary agreement? I really think that she has to go further and to spell out exactly what the proposal is now from the UK to resolve this situation. Because, Mr. Speaker, when musicians and creative people tour, they don't just power up an economy that's massively important to us. They represent us all on the global stage. So we have to get this resolved now.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to talk the Honourable Lady through the situation. So during the negotiations, the EU tabled texts regarding short-stay visa-free travel. And embedded in this proposal was a declaration which would have covered a very small number of paid activities. With regard to artists, it covered ad hoc performances. Of course, this declaration was non-binding and didn't address anything like technical or support staff. And crucially, it didn't cover the whole issue of work permits, which EU member states are able to unilaterally put in place. Furthermore, of course, these proposals would have enshrined permanent visa-free short stays for all EU citizens, not just current but future EU citizens as well, in the agreement. And that is just simply not compatible with our manifesto commitment to take back control of our borders. And our proposals instead were based on the views of the music industry, as I've already said, would have been very mutually beneficial across the EU and Europe and the UK, and would have allowed musicians and support staff as well to travel and perform in the UK and the EU more easily without needing work permits. The EU did not propose and would not accept a tailored deal for musicians, for artists, for their support staff to tour across the EU and the UK. As I've said, the UK's door remains open should the EU change its mind. We recognise that the outcome will mean some additional requirements need to be met for the sector, and we are working with the sector as fast as we can to put in place the support and the information that they need. But, Mr. Speaker, Labour voted for this deal in the knowledge of what it involved, including the end of free movement. What they're asking us to go back and renegotiate now is exactly what we negotiated at that time. So they literally can't have it both ways. They need consistency. And what the sector needs more than anything at the moment is certainty. And that is what we are working to provide them.
Let's head to Kent with Damien Green. Damien Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The international success of UK musicians has for decades been not just a big economic benefit for the country, but a huge and successful way of promoting our culture around the world. So it seemed extraordinary that any British government would turn down a deal that allowed our musicians to tour music if that deal was practical. So can the Minister assure me both that that's not what happened, and also what she's doing now to resume negotiations so we can get a realistic deal, which is essential for the future of our music industry?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman, my right honourable friend, is absolutely right. The government recognises the absolute vital importance of the UK's thriving cultural and creative industries, and that is why we pushed for ambitious arrangements for performers and artists to be able to work right across Europe after the end of freedom of movement. The EU didn't accept our proposals, so now we need to make sure that we are working to facilitate those arrangements as best we can. That means giving musicians and others access to information, access to guidance, access to what the individual criteria is for which EU member state, and then working with those individual member states to make sure that that process is as seamless, as fast, effective and simple as it can possibly be.
I'm now going to call SNP spokesperson John Nicholson, who's also participating virtually, who's got 1 minute. John Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Sir, COVID has been gruelling for the industry. The last thing it needs are the new Brexit visa barriers. We now know that the UK government, not the EU, but the UK government has insisted upon. There's no money to be made from streaming. Artists make their income by touring. New barriers, visas and endless red tape mean EU performers won't come to our festivals and our performers will face prohibitive new costs. It's wantonly cruel. Now, the Minister mentioned the Musicians' Union, so let me quote their head. He said, "The government fails to understand the issues facing touring musicians." He's an expert, and I know that the UK government doesn't like experts, but this is more Brexit zealotry causing misery. Will the Secretary of State listen and intervene and publish that correspondence as my colleague requested? put it in the library. Let's read it.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course there is a close historical relationship between the UK and the EU, and that must endure, and that will endure, Mr. Speaker. Artists and musicians from the EU are welcome, they are encouraged to visit and perform in the UK, and vice versa, and the government will do everything we can to make that as seamless as possible.
Let's head to the southwest with Selene Saxby. Selene Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend for the work she is doing to support the arts and culture sectors through the pandemic? And can my honourable friend confirm how many music venues and other music organisations have benefited from the government's £1.57 billion Cultural Recovery Fund?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, actually, I'd like to start by thanking my honourable friend for the work that she does to champion the cultural institutions across her constituency. She's a great voice for the people of North Devon, sorry, but I'm sure she's very nice about the people of North Dorset as well. But thank you for her question. The 1.57 Cultural Recovery Fund, of which we've already delivered more than £1 billion in support to various arts, heritage and performance organisations, to date has awarded 680 awards to music, totalling over £111 million, Mr. Speaker.
Let's head to Wales with Kevin Brennan. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did ask the Prime Minister last week, and he promised a meeting with myself and the Conservative Chair of the Select Committee on this, and I was still to hear from Number 10. I don't know if the Minister can shed any light on that, but I do want her to realise that a lot of touring musicians are not there with a lot of tech support. They are actually individuals starting out, or perhaps who are established, but not with that kind of level of support. And effectively, it represents the R&D of an important industry. They may just be traveling with a single instrument on a plane with some fans in Europe. But I think the most important thing she could do today is, others have asked this, is to publish in full the details of the discussions between the EU and the UK on this, so that we can all see what the ambitious proposals were and why she finds them so objectionable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I know the honourable gentleman is a great champion for the music industry and not a bad musical performer himself. But you know, he's absolutely right. We do understand that for those starting out in the music industry, the ability to be able to tour is something that's so vital to their career and their future prosperity, which is why the EU proposals, which didn't support touring activity, they just supported ad hoc artist activity, would not have done it for so many of them, which is why we pushed for something so much better. We are very disappointed that the EU didn't see it our way, but you know, we will try and do everything we can to support them moving forward. And you know, and I'll speak to my colleagues in Bays and the Home Office about publishing the information that he's requested.
Hertfordshire with Gagan Mahindra. Gagan Mahindra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister will be aware, South West Hertfordshire is home to many successful and established musicians. Can my honourable friend confirm, though, that the UK's proposals in negotiations were based on the views of the UK music industry and would have allowed musicians to travel and perform in the UK and Europe more easily without the need for work permits?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this. As I've said already, we work very collaboratively with a whole range of stakeholders in this, including UK Music and the Musicians' Union, to put forward proposals that were really based upon the views of the music industry as to what it was that they needed. It would have been mutually beneficial to the UK and the EU, and it would have allowed musicians and, crucially, their support staff or their technicians to travel and perform more easily without the need for work permits.
To Scotland with Jamie Stone. Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I must be honest and say I do welcome the fact, and I quote, that the door is still open to UK performers performing permit-free in the EU. Surely, Mr. Speaker, the danger is that concert promoters in the EU will simply take the easy option and go for a Dane or a German performer rather than the sheer hassle of the British performers. And also, there are problems with the movement of musical instruments, which we know about. I have written to DCMS just now saying, could we please have a meeting between ministers, myself, and musicians who are knowledgeable about this issue. At the end of the day, we've got to try and sort it out. So I would be extremely grateful if the Minister would agree to such a meeting.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, look, yeah, absolutely. I'm very happy to meet with anybody on this because it's really important that we continue regular engagement with the sector. We need to make sure that we've got a very deep understanding of their needs and their questions in light of these changes. We know that it will pose a whole number of queries. I mean, most recently we held an EU exit explainer seminar with over 200 sector representative bodies in attendance. The Secretary of State's got a roundtable on Wednesday, tomorrow, with representatives across the cultural and creative industries, and we will keep doing those sorts of sessions all the time people need and require them.
Sarah Presley.
Speaker, I've had quite a number of constituents contact me from Highburn and Hasland and highlighting their concerns on this. So can the Minister please reassure my constituents by outlining what the Department is doing to address this?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I know that my honourable friend is such a great champion for her local area and will be taking the concerns of her constituents incredibly seriously, as indeed do we. We understand that we need to work with all the sort of music sector trade bodies to make sure that we give people access to the information they need as to what are the situations in all the individual nation states, because they're all different, which is one of the most confusing things about this, and to make sure that we are working with those individual nations as closely as we can to ensure that any barriers that are in place are made as simple and easy to navigate as possible.
Let's head to Putney with Fleur Anderson. Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Putney, creative artists and support staff have already been damaged by the uncertainty around Brexit and on top of COVID effects, and so not being able to tour. This failure of negotiations for the creative industry's 90-day visa is letting down industry and the arts. Is the Minister really just going to sit back with her door open, or re-enter negotiations and be prepared for some give and take with individual countries to get that tailored deal that the creative industries really need?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what I've said during the course of today that could ever give the honourable lady the viewpoint that I am just prepared to sit back and do nothing about this, or that I'm happy with the way things have panned out. I did vote for the trade agreement, but then I presume so did she. We are not sitting there doing nothing. We are talking, we are and we will continue to talk to other EU member states. They could, of course, unilaterally make things easier, Mr. Speaker, for those travelling artists and musicians, but of course any changes they make would be very, very likely to cover all visitors, not just those from the UK. But the key thing we can do is continue to talk to the sector and make sure that we're putting in place any support and information and guidance that they need.
Let's head up to Cumbria with Simon Fell. Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by a number of constituents on this issue, notably the Furness Tradition Group. Could my honourable friend confirm that despite some of the reporting in recent days, touring in the EU is still possible for UK artists and musicians, and that the government's working towards a more formal arrangement with the EU?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, quite simply, of course, touring is still encouraged. Artists and musicians from the EU are very welcome and encouraged to visit and perform in the UK, and absolutely vice versa. I'm sure different individual member states have different restrictions when it comes to visas and work permits. Some have very limited, some are a little bit more complicated, this is very much a quid pro quo. It works for the EU as much as it does for our musicians here in the UK, and I'm sure that there are very, very many countries that want to come to an arrangement that will allow their musicians to move and to travel and to work and to tour and to take their beautiful music around Europe.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that this is a double whammy for anyone that cares about levelling up in the creative industries in West Yorkshire and beyond. Recent figures have showed the creative industries in West Yorkshire and the Humber have grown by 10.9%. So it's really important we keep this industry flourishing for jobs and opportunities. So can the Minister tell us what the government have put in place to compensate for these inevitable loss of opportunities? And also, can she make available what impact assessment has been done to the changes that this will make on the ability of businesses to continue to flourish after COVID?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we know it's been just such a horrible year for particularly the sectors that I represent, the cultural, the creative industries, those in West Yorkshire and around the whole UK. COVID has been a bitter blow, and of course, we didn't get the agreement from the EU that we wanted on touring musicians. But we do want to do everything we can to support. That's about providing clear, easy to access information, speaking to our colleagues in EU member states, and also we'll talk to our colleagues in the Treasury to see what financial support can be put in place at a future fiscal event.
14th withdrawn, so we're going up to Scotland with Tommy Shepherd. Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Edinburgh Fringe is the largest arts festival in the world. I hope the Minister will be aware that this event and others like it have a vital role to play in developing new work and providing a springboard for artists to then subsequently tour that work. Does she therefore not understand that by refusing to maintain a visa exemption for artists, she is fatally undermining festivals in Scotland and the United Kingdom?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I'm a massive fan of the Edinburgh Fringe. In fact, all of the Edinburgh festivals. Last summer was the first in any since I can remember that I wasn't able to go to Edinburgh and see them firsthand for myself, and it was a great something that I missed out greatly. And I met very recently, just before Christmas, with representatives from across the Edinburgh festivals to talk about all the issues that they're facing, particularly with regard to coronavirus, but others as well. And but I should correct him that it wasn't for want of trying that we don't get this free movement of our musicians to be able to perform and to tour across the EU, or indeed vice versa. We fought very hard for it, and of course, our own arrangements with regard to visas and work permits mean that musicians and other performers from outside of the UK are very welcome to our shores.
Let's head to Wales with Stephen Crabb. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. British bands and professional musicians represent a hugely successful cultural export for the UK, and I know the Minister recognises that, and I know that she understands the importance of international touring in that success. But can I ask my honourable friend today what more she can do on a bilateral basis with her counterparts in EU member states to find specific solution to the problems that we're discussing today and ensure that touring remains as easy as possible for our world-leading musicians?
Thank my right honourable friend for that question. Of course, I'd love to, as I've said, the door is open. I'd love to be able to, change this across the board straight away, but that isn't going to be possible in the immediate or foreseeable future. So it is all about having those bilateral conversations with colleagues across EU member states. And at this stage, it wouldn't be about a waiver, but it would be about facilitation and what we can do to make the situation as easy and straightforward as possible. And of course, those are the conversations that we'll be having.
Let's head to Northern Ireland with Ian Paisley. Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Van Morrison penned the protest song "We Are Born to Be Free." However, it appears that musicians like him and others are now completely caught up in a red tape trap and are not free at all. I wonder if the Minister could clarify the situation with regards to carnets for musicians and instruments travelling from GB to Northern Ireland and from Northern Ireland back to GB. Can she confirm that they are definitely not required within the UK? However, once a person gets to Northern Ireland, will they be required to travel south, or will the common arrangements that we have with the Republic of Ireland still be in place? And once south, can a person then onward travel without a carnet to the rest of Europe? Could we get clarity on those issues?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Van Morrison also penned Brown-Eyed Girl, which is my own personal anthem. But I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. If you're an artist or organisation based in Northern Ireland, you'll not be required to obtain ATA carnets or musical instrument certificates when touring in the EU, because the Northern Ireland Protocol means that Northern Ireland is part of the same regulatory environment for goods as the European Union. But Northern Ireland citizens who don't hold Irish citizenship as well will be subject to the same changes as other British citizens on mobility and business travel when going to EU member states, but of course not to the Republic of Ireland.
Said to Loughborough with Jane Hunt. Jane Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, a number of my constituents in the entertainment, arts and creative industries have contacted me setting out the impacts the new immigration restrictions will have on their livelihoods. It is clear that the UK government strive to gain a mutually beneficial agreement with the EU. Can the Minister therefore set out what steps the government is taking to continue to urge the EU to return to the negotiating table and reopen discussions to reach a more preferable agreement for all parties? And can I take this opportunity on behalf of my constituents to ask the EU to reconsider their position?
Thank you very much to my honourable friend for that question. Of course, there isn't the opportunity the negotiating team did negotiate an opportunity to come back and review this in the years ahead. So there, the light at the end of the tunnel is not entirely switched off, but there is quite a lot that we can do in between European nation states to try and make things a lot more easy and straightforward. But she's absolutely right to highlight that this is something that impacts European EU artists as much as it does those from the UK, and we want to make their lives as easy and straightforward as possible.
Let's head up to Greater Manchester with Barbara Keeley. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as issues with visas or work permits, UK musicians working in EU countries risk being double charged their social security contributions if they work in a country that has opted out of the social security coordination under the detached worker rules. Can the Minister set out what the government is doing to avoid this and ensure that UK musicians don't face that financial penalty while they're working in the EU?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really pleased that the Honourable Lady has given me the opportunity to answer this question. The Protocol on Social Security Coordination secured in the agreement ensures that UK nationals and EU citizens have a range of social security cover when working and living in the EU and UK. It also supports business and trade by ensuring that cross-border workers and their employers are only liable to pay social security contributions in one state at a time. And that's obviously very beneficial to smaller cultural organisations, particularly who may not have the required cash flow to finance any duplicate payments. So member states have until the 31st of January to sign up to the detached worker provision, and the UK continues to engage with our European counterparts via our global and international stakeholder network to encourage countries to sign up to this provision ahead of the deadline.
Let's head over to Harlow East with Bob Blackman. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's clearly no substitute for live music, and during the COVID pandemic, that has been severely depressed in terms of opportunities. So in addition to having discussions about how we might ensure that musicians can travel within the European Union, within the UK, can my honourable friend update the House on what discussion she's had with TV companies to allow especially emerging musicians the opportunity to have their music recorded and then actually broadcast in other parts of the European Union?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As ever, an ingenious question from my honourable friend. I know that so many of our brilliant cultural organisations have worked really hard to improve their digital offer, particularly over the various lockdowns. I visited the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra earlier in the year and saw the amazing work they're doing to bring their beautiful music to audiences all around the world because of that investment that they've made in that capacity. So I think he's hit on a really strong concept, and it's something that I will discuss with my dear colleague in DCMS, the Minister for Data and Media.
Right, let's head down to Wales with Alex Davies-Jones. Alex Davies-Jones.
Diolch, Mr Speaker. The Minister may not be aware, but the world-renowned Tory band from Rhondda and Taff are the current European brass band champions. Now, in order to travel through Europe to defend their hard-fought-for title and to visit for concerts and workshops, each member of the band will now require a visa and work permit, despite them being an amateur organisation. This will undoubtedly add an additional financial and administrative burden that could be avoided. What discussions has the Minister had to ensure that brass bands from across the UK can continue to fly the flag for us in Europe without this bureaucracy?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wasn't aware of her band, and I wish them the very best of luck in their endeavours to defend their fantastic title. If the tour that they're going on is not paid by the individual venues that they're visiting, there may not be an issue here. So this is something that they would have to discuss with some of the individual member states just to get clarity on this. But I'm very happy to speak to her a bit further about it.
Let's head over to Bedfordshire with Richard Fuller. Richard Fuller.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's clear this issue gets to the core of our inextricable cultural links with our European partners, and it's good to see the Minister stressing the urgency of securing bilateral agreements and in making sure that current arrangements are simplified for people. Can I make a special request that she bears in mind individual musicians, many of whom carry multiple instruments, in her efforts to simplify the current arrangements?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As ever, my honourable friend makes a really, really excellent point. Of course, there are so many facets to this that we do need to keep in mind as we move forward, and certainly that is something that I'm very happy to talk further with him about.
Twickenham with Munera Wilson. Munera Wilson.
Much, Mr Speaker. I've been contacted by a number of constituents who work not just as musicians, but also actors, dancers, choreographers and puppeteers about the government's failure to secure visa-free work permits for touring artists in the EU. This comes as a further hammer blow to their livelihoods, with the continued shutdown of live entertainment, as well as a huge gaps in government support for many working in these industries. So what assurances can the Minister give to my constituents, particularly students such as Fresca David, who's just starting out on her career, that they are not being treated as an afterthought by this government?
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker. Well, my message to the Honourable Lady's constituent would be that the government entirely recognises the vital importance of the UK's thriving creative artists, and we want to support them in every way we can, and I'm just so pleased there wasn't a Liberal Democrat government who would have voted for no deal.
Let's head to Scotland with Andrew Bowie. Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. This is a really serious issue and the Scottish musicians will undoubtedly be affected. So does my honourable friend agree with me that instead of simply masquerading as a serious party of government, the Scottish National Party should actually start acting like one, cease these politically charged, ill-informed, deliberately misleading games, an example of which we've seen today, that do nothing to help the situation, and actually work with us, support us in attempting to find a solution, a mutually agreeable solution, support Scottish musicians that have been let down by the EU's decision not to accept our compromise proposals, and work to get an agreement over visa arrangements.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend has hit the nail on the head. What we need to do now is to move forward. We need to come forward with sensible, proactive solutions for the UK music sector. The industry themselves has said what we need now is clarity, not recriminations. That's what we're working to provide, and we very much appreciate the support from across the House for us to do that.
In Scotland, we go over to David Linden. David Linden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My Belvedere constituent, Louise McLean, is just one of the many people connected to the music industry. You can see that live performers are just the latest casualty in a Brexit, which Scotland didn't vote for. Last year, as Culture Minister, the Honourable Member for Selby and Ainsty said, and I quote, "It's absolutely essential that free movement for artists is protected post-2020. So does the Honourable Lady agree with her ministerial colleague, and why was this view ignored in government if it's also the view of the music industry?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, absolutely, I agree with the comments of my predecessor, and that is why we put forward these fantastic proposals to the EU, which were based on the views of the music industry, which would have been mutually beneficial and would have allowed musicians and support staff to tour. And we're very, very disappointed that the EU didn't see it the same way.
Let's head to Romsey with Caroline Noakes. Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was pleased to hear my honourable friend mention technicians, the sound and lighting engineers that make touring possible. But when she is looking for a solution, which I know she is doing, will she also include companies like Beat the Streets in Romsey, who provide the tour buses that make it possible for artists to travel Europe? Without them being also able to access the continent, it will spell a death knell for the entire industry.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and absolutely right. The Right Honourable Lady is, my Right Honourable friend is just such a great champion for businesses in her local area, and particularly those who've been so badly affected, not just by COVID, but are now very disappointed with the EU's refusal to accept our very reasonable propositions. She'll know that the sector's benefited from a range of different support measures over the last year that were put in place through COVID, but we do need to support them moving forward. That's why the EU's proposal wouldn't have worked, because it wouldn't have supported the valuable support workers that she mentions and that she has in her constituency to be able to do the work. Quite simply, without them, touring wouldn't be possible.
Let's head to the southwest with Ben Bradshaw. Ben Bradshaw.
The Minister and Conservative MPs keep claiming that they made this fantastic offer, but we can't test that, can we, Mr. Speaker, because they haven't published it. The EU has. It's there in black and white on that page 171 of the draft agreement from March last year, allowing 90-day visa-free touring by British musicians and other cultural activities. So will the Minister now publish the government's proposal so we can see where the truth lies?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'd have to correct the honourable gentleman, because the document doesn't say 90 days visa-free touring by UK musicians. It's a lot more opaque than that, which is why we couldn't simply sign up to that, because it just would not have delivered what we needed for our musicians and just flew in the face of what the British public voted for in the case of controlling our borders. But as I've already said, I'll speak to colleagues across Bays and Home Office to see what more we can publish on the details of the negotiations.
Richard Hogan.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The north of England, as you all know, Mr. Speaker, has helped form and then exported some of the biggest musicians and bands across the world in recent decades. Touring is not a nice to have, it is an absolute financial necessity for musicians from both the UK and the EU. But can the Minister confirm that it's the UK government who pushed for a more ambitious agreement with the EU on temporary movement of business travellers, but it was the EU that has unreasonably rejected this proposal?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for putting it so simply and so succinctly. That is exactly what happened. The proposals we put forward would have allowed musicians to travel and perform in the UK and the EU more easily, and they were rejected by the EU.
Let's head up to Merseyside with Maria Riedel. Maria Riedel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been listening to the Minister's replies, and it's always somebody else's fault with this government, isn't it? Our world-class events and production companies like Adlib in my constituency tour the EU with UK and US-based musicians, but very few EU-based companies tour the UK. So doesn't the Minister realise that her giving up on agreeing comprehensive arrangements to enable this to continue has the effect of potentially destroying a sector which has a huge export success, as well as destroying the jobs and livelihoods of the technicians who are already struggling because of the pandemic restrictions to their trade?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I recognise that this is not the solution that we would have wanted. It's not the solution that we've fought really hard for. But I should also point out to the honourable lady that the Labour Party voted for this deal in the full knowledge of what it involved, including the end to freedom of movement.
Mr. Speaker, from the Horns, the Colosseum to the Palace Theatre, music literally beats at the heart of Watford in my constituency. And that means that we have many amazing musicians. And so the question they are asking me is, can my honourable friend please confirm that it was not the UK that ended these visas, and also what measures are going forward to support this amazing sector? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable friend is just such a vibrant champion, not just for the music industry in his constituency. We've also spoken about the film industry. I expect him at any moment to be descending from the ceiling in a wire in the next Mission Impossible movie. He does it all with great panache, and that's exactly what we want to do. The Cultural Recovery Fund has all been about supporting music venues so that musicians can get back to doing what they love. Arts Council, England are there to support them, and we'll look at every opportunity we have to put in place more of that vital encouragement and support.
Howell Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Professor Paul Carr of the University of South Wales reports that in 2019, music tourism alone generated a spend of £124 million in Wales, supporting 1,754 jobs. The government's failure to secure visa-free travel is a huge blow, especially to young people at a tipping point in their creative careers. And in particular, it will diminish the strong international quality of our national culture. So what assessments has she made of the long-term impact of this wholly avoidable mess, specifically on the cultural industry in Wales?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we know that there will be obstacles in the immediate period for those who want to travel and tour abroad. But once we enable people to access the information that they need, and they're able to see what the situation is with all the different member states, because they all vary wildly. I know that this is a sector, and in Wales in particular, where musicians are dedicated, they are vibrant, they are resourceful, they are practical, and they will overcome any bumps in the road to be able to do what they do so brilliantly and continue to share it with our European neighbours.
Central Reigate with Crispin Blunt.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank you and the honourable member for Perth and North Perthshire for providing the opportunity to help my honourable friend correct the misleading social media chatter amongst professional musicians and other performance artists and from the benches opposite about exactly where responsibility lies for this situation. Can my honourable friend confirm my impression that the European Union negotiators appear to have rather cynically used and abused the interests of their own musicians and their own music fans in order to undermine the United Kingdom's government's commitment to its own citizens around regaining control of our borders? And however ungrateful and ungracious the Musicians' Union has been in regard of my honourable friend's
Order, I think the Minister's got
a
Order! Minister, please. I think it was far too long a question.
Thank you so much to my right honourable friend for his question. I mean, he's right. We did fight very hard for this. We do understand, not just for performers from the UK. Actually, he's absolutely right, for performers from the EU as well, because the UK music scene is, I would say, the best in the world. And and putting any obstacles or any tests in the way of EU performers to come here, is a very difficult position for them as well. I mean, we are a lot more forthcoming. We don't put in place work permits, and we have a lot more sensitive approaches to visas for performers coming across from the EU. But of course, it would have been so lovely for that to have been the situation right across all EU member states as well.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Similar to many families in my constituency, artists have been pointing out that many bands are comprised of a mixture of EU and UK nationals. Does she not see the impossible situation they will now face, with different members being faced with different levels of bureaucracy and red tape wherever they tour?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yeah, absolutely. I understand the honourable gentleman's suggestion that this does cause a problem for bands in particular, or orchestras who have members from all different EU member states. Of course, the guidance is that we all have to seek the instructions from each member state as to how we proceed. But had the EU have accepted our suggestions in the first place, we wouldn't be in this position.
Scottman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree that our world-leading artists and musicians are not just important to the UK economically, but also vital to our country's culture and soft power. The arts play an important role in my constituency in North Cornwall, where we have the Leapalooza Festival and the Rock Oyster Festival, attracting hundreds of talented artists and performers. Given that, I was disappointed to hear the EU's rejection of the UK's visa-free travel offer. Will my right honourable friend commit to doing what she can to secure access to EU countries for UK artists and musicians, and keep negotiating to try and encourage the EU to show some flexibility for the sake of my constituents?
Thank you so much to my honourable friend for that question. Yes, of course, we will keep that negotiation open. We'll try and make things as simple and as painless as possible. Of course, our door remains open if the EU want to come back and look at this again. And where visas apply, our agreement with the EU does contain measures that will help ensure processes are as prompt and smooth as possible, and we'll work to exploit those as much as we can.
Clive Efford.
Deputy Speaker, this morning the UK music industry told the DCMS Select Committee that despite being 1% of the world's population, the UK produces 10% of its music. And this industry has been one of the fastest growing over the last 10 years. It employs 2 million people with the potential to create 1 million jobs in the next 10 years. So it's incredulous that the government has got us into this situation. So can the Minister say when it is that she will start the negotiations on a supplementary agreement so we can sort this mess out?
Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, he's right to say how incredibly successful around the world our music industry is, and that's why we fought so hard to get much better arrangements in the agreement. I think the thing we need to do now is make sure that our sectors are prepared to face any challenges in the future, and that's why we are continuing those dialogues with them to understand the ongoing impacts and the challenges that may be faced. We need to make sure that they have the right support at the right time and do everything we can to work with other member states to ensure that this transition is as smooth as possible.
Damian Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In addition to trying to improve visa-free travel for musicians, could my honourable friend say whether the government hopes to progress on easing the movement of musical equipment from country to country within Europe so that it's not treated like any other physical goods, to ease the cabotage restrictions for touring festivals and bands as well? And also finally, could she confirm whether EU-based music showcases fall under the short business trip exemption for conferences, trade fairs and exhibitions? These showcases are often so important in making the careers of developing talent.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. With regard to the haulage, the cabotage, this is something. This is not something that's just been imposed upon just us because we've left the EU. This is actually some rules that apply to both the UK and the EU haulage firms. So this is something I do want to speak more about with colleagues in the Department of Transport and European colleagues as well, to see what can be done to address this, because this is not just something that impacts us, it's something that impacts companies that are moving musical equipment across Europe, no matter which European member state they come from. With regard to his other question, if performers are visiting in business capacity, i.e. to negotiate a future tour or any other kind of scoping arrangements and various other things, then that would fall under the business visa waiver. But it's always really important just to sort of check the individual rules of that EU nation member state, just to make sure that they haven't got anything in particular that would need to be abided by.
Steve Bryan.
Thank you. Isn't it the case that the longer the situation persists, the worse it gets?
Sorry, my fault. I missed out Mary Kelly Foy. I do beg the House's pardon and the Honourable Gentleman's pardon. Mary Kelly Foy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think we can all agree that no competent government would accept such a significant loss of revenue to an already struggling sector without a plan B to mitigate the economic impact. So can the Minister tell me what plan is in place to make up for the financial shortfall to the creative industries as a result of the government's failure to negotiate visa exemptions with the European Union?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just want to make sure that the Honourable Lady isn't sort of labouring under some sort of misapprehension that the EU made a bespoke offer on musicians that we turned down. That simply isn't the case. We fought very hard to get a solution which would have worked to the benefit of our musicians and those from the EU. As ever, we want to make sure that our music industry is supported. We supported them with the Cultural Recovery Fund and Arts Council England have a whole range of grants and financial support on offer. But in terms of this particular issue, we'll be speaking to colleagues in Treasury to see whether any support can be put forward at a future fiscal event.
Steve Brine.
Deputy Speaker, surely the longer this situation persists, the worse that it gets for UK artists, and the longer their recovery from COVID actually becomes. Because right now, musicians, agents and those who book for them have got way too much risk on fixing European gigs. And surely it's no good opposition members who voted for no deal joining the debate now. We have the deal, but surely we need to return to it with the sensible UK proposal that was on the table that presumably, and as the Minister has said today, still stands.
Thank you so much. And my honourable friend has just basically hit the nail on the head and does it in a much more articulate way than I could. That's absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker. The deal's still on the table. Our door is open for the EU to come back and take up that deal if they want to. In the short term, we're speaking to member states bilaterally about the visa regime and whether there's any facilitation as opposed to a waiver that could be put in place. But actually what the sector now need is certainty and us to be able to put in place the guidance and the support for them to move forward.
Dave Duggan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister acknowledged today that this situation is deeply unsatisfactory, and so too have the many MPs who have signed my early day motion highlighting this crisis for touring artists. Today, the Minister committed her department to preparing the creative sector for this new regime. Can she assure the House that this will be better than the way that DEFRA helped prepare fishermen and farmers, which was to throw them off the bureaucratic cliff? And is she not worried that this wanton and wholly avoidable impediment to the fraternal sharing of arts and culture exposes a rather narrow and isolationist vision of the future by this UK government?
Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I mean, the key here is making sure that we put in place the guidance and the support that the sector needs to be able to deal with any of the new changes. And that's what we're talking very collaboratively with the sector about at the moment. It's what we're going to be putting in place, opportunities for people to learn much more about how things stand and where they need to go to access advice and support. And those are the practical things that we can talk about right now as to we help our sector move forward and continue to be, you know, the vibrant ambassadors for UK and our hugely brilliant cultural sector that they have always been and will continue to be.
And finally, Robin Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A single European tour may visit dozens of venues, employing hundreds of people skilled in everything from logistics to finance, lighting to pyrotechnics, costumes and more to make it a success. What reassurances can my honourable friend give people like Aberconwy resident and experienced front of house engineer Berenice Hardman that practical arrangements like visas, carnets and cabotage will be easier and simpler for her to deal with in the future?
Thank you so much. The assurance I would give her is that we are going to be having conversations with colleagues across all the different individual nation states of the EU to see what measures we can put in place to facilitate the arrangements. Now, some of them actually have very straightforward arrangements right now. Some of them don't impose extra work permits, and some of them are very flexible when it comes to their visas, others less so. But so what we need to do is to speak to them to make sure that these can be as smooth and as fast and as easy to understand as possible, and that is the key to us being able to move forward.
Thank you. There being almost nobody present in the chamber, I'm not going to suspend before we go on to the next item of business. So we will move straight to the 10-minute rule motion. I call Mr. David Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend your efficiency in that respect. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to place a duty on universities to promote freedom of speech, to make provision for fining universities that do not comply with that duty, and for connected purposes. The principal reason that our kingdom is a great nation can be encompassed in one word: freedom. Freedom of action, freedom of assembly,